Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Dream Theater, Distance Over Time. Velocity, as they say. This is the newest studio album from these progressive metal legends, and overall, going into this album, some of the lead singles from this thing didn't excite me a whole ton, I guess you could say. The only one that I never got to really cover in any type of detail here on the channel was Paralyzed, which I thought was just kind of a decent track overall when I covered it originally. So I wasn't really sure what I was going to be getting here on this new album. Overall, I think that this is a pretty decent project from start to finish. I don't think that this is a great album, but at the same time, I don't think that this is a bad album either. It's just decent, okay, if you will. Overall, I found a fair amount to enjoy here on this project, but at the same time, I found a fair amount of things on this thing that just kind of bugged me from time to time, or just kind of got in my way of fully enjoying this project to the maximum extent. I feel like the beginning of this album is probably the weakest part of it overall. The opening track, Untethered Angel, is an alright track, I guess, though it does introduce one of my least favorite aspects of this album, that being the vocals on this thing. Not necessarily that they sound terrible from start to finish or anything, it's just that they have this odd manipulation or a vocal effect on them. I'm not really sure what it is, but it makes the vocals throughout a good amount of this project sound kind of hollow and metallic. Not really sure what exactly is going on with the vocals on this thing in that regard, and it's not a problem throughout every moment of this album. It just occasionally does pop up, and it does affect some tracks worse than others. And I do feel like this opening track, Untethered Angel, is probably one of the cuts on this album that has it the worst to some extent, I guess you could say. And it's not really helped by the fact I don't find much of the rest of the track to be super exciting either. The second track on the album, Paralyzed, like I said before, was one that I originally covered in one of my track review videos, where I said it was a pretty decent but kind of safe song for the band. And I do still stand by the fact that I feel like it's a pretty safe song for the group to release overall. It's pretty standard track, really, structurally speaking. Though, honestly, this track has cooled on me a lot since initially reviewing it in that track review video, which, considering I wasn't super high on the song originally, isn't really all that good a thing when it comes to listening to the song in the context of the record. I just feel like it's, the most typical, the most straightforward sounding out of anything on this project. And once again, the vocals on this track do have that kind of hollow, metallic quality to them, especially on the chorus of the track. It just kind of distracting and ruins to some extent what otherwise is at least a decently catchy chorus. Starting around the third track on the album, Falling to the Light, I feel like the album begins to pick up the pace a bit more and get a bit more interesting. I feel like those opening couple of tracks just aren't the most exciting that this album has to offer. However, if you move past those couple of tracks, the album, like I said, does get a bit more interesting. There's a bit more going on here. And a track like this third song on the album, I think, is one of the more solid cuts on this thing. The track Barstool Warrior has this very fantastical and just grand feel to it overall. I think it's pretty cool, and it definitely makes the track stand out amongst some of the others in the track listing just based on the overall vibe of the track alone. And the lyrics on this track are also, a bit more interesting than some of the lyrics on the rest of the album overall. There's a bit of storytelling going on here. Even if it is pretty simple, it still is, kind of interesting. I think the two tracks, At Wit's End and Pale Blue Dot, that come towards the end of this album, and they're also some of the longest cuts on the entire album, are some of the best that this project has to offer overall. I feel like these two tracks have just the most content packed into them overall, not just because they're some of the longest in the track listing, but I just feel like they have the most interesting ideas thrown into them. Not only that, but I feel like a lot of the performances on these couple of tracks are some of the strongest overall across this entire project. I really like how At Wit's End manages to balance some very technical playing, but also manages to sneak in some more melodic and emotional playing in there as well. I like how these two different styles are managed to be mixed together into this one track in a way that works really nicely overall. I'm not the biggest fan of the kind of fake-out ending that this track has going for it. I feel like it's kind of unnecessary, especially because it's not even like the last song on the album, but it didn't really ruin my enjoyment of this track overall. It's probably my favorite song on the entire album. The track Out of Reach that comes packed between these two pretty great tracks on the album is probably one of my least favorite overall. It's the slower, more melodic track, which, I don't hate it based on that alone, but I just don't find the track to be super interesting overall, I guess. And it's probably some of my least favorite lyrics across this entire project. Like, for example, the opening lyrics to the song. There's something about this girl, some kind of magic. I swear she cast a spell on me. Not the first time, might be the last. I mean, it's just really generic, just not really all that interesting or creative. And overall, that's just how I feel about much of the song overall. It's just not a highlight on the album for me personally. And when it comes to the lyrics on the rest of the album, I would say that they're alright for the most part. There's not really a ton of standouts when it comes to the lyrics on this thing. For the most part, they're just serviceable. They have a goal they set out to do. They do it pretty much, and that's all there is to it. I mean, for this style of music, a lot of the technical playing and just the overall instrumentation is going to be a bigger focus than the lyrics on this thing. But still, I do kind of wish at times the lyrics across this project were a bit more interesting or just a bit more unique overall. You do have some instances of some unique storytelling or attempts at it, at least on tracks like Barstool Warrior that I mentioned earlier, or even a track like At Wit's End, for example. But then there's just other moments on the project that I didn't find to be super interesting when it came to the lyrics, like the beforehand mentioned Out of Reach, or even Paralyzed, for example. The instrumentation on this album as a whole is pretty solid. Given that it's Dream Theater, it does tend to be on the more technical side of things. However, the band always manages to keep it, not super technical or overdone or anything quite like that, which is, how I tend to like my technical music done. So, yeah, I like the fair amount of the instrumentation here on this project, especially when it came to the guitars. As I said before, I especially like it when they're able to blend some of those more technical moments on tracks like At Wit's End with some of the more melodic moments in that track as well. I think it makes for a really interesting composition and one that's really enjoyable to listen to. Probably some of the weakest instrumental moments on this album come from some of the more just uninteresting tracks in general. Tracks like Paralyzed, which, as I said before, just has a really typical structure to it when it comes to just how the song is arranged, or even a track like Out of Reach, which is just a bit more, just uninteresting to me, I guess. I will say a fair amount of the instrumentals just don't jump out to me as being, super exciting and some of the best I've heard all year or anything quite like that. A good amount of them are just, decent overall. But, the ones that do stand out enough for me to be, pretty happy with them overall. I do think the instrumentals on this album as a whole are pretty solid. So overall, I would say that this is a pretty decent album. Like I said, this isn't one that I'm in love with or anything like that. It's definitely not going to be like one of my favorite albums of the year or anything quite like that. But for what it is, I think it's a pretty solid, progressive metal album. If you're a fan of this style of music and you like Dream Theater, I think you'll get at least some enjoyment from this project, especially from some of the best songs on this album overall. With that said, there are problems I have with this thing. There are some weaker cuts on here. There are some moments that I think are just kind of uninteresting and that I probably won't remember a few months down the line. But still, it's a decent project overall. I'd recommend it to fans of the band and this style of music, though probably not anyone else. But yeah, with that said, that concludes this review. Once again, this is just my own personal opinion. If you happen to disagree, if you happen to have an opinion of your own, perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. I greatly appreciate seeing it down there. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. My review for today's video was just for the standard version of this album. I'm aware that there's a bonus track version with a bonus track on it. I'm actually going to be talking about that bonus track in this week's track review segment video. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that song, make sure to watch that video when it comes out if you want to hear what I think about it. I just don't want to talk about it in today's video because I don't review bonus versions or deluxe editions of albums in the reviews. But yeah, once again, thank you for watching this review, and stay golden.